Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Wednesday, the 12th of December, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at currencies. Dollar holding on to its strength, and the news this morning in the UK is that the Prime Minister faces a vote of no confidence within our own party. So it'll be interesting to see how the markets open. This morning, we're just at the opening now. So the dollar index pushing higher still, and continuing to look pretty bullish on all three time frames. A new upside target here activated, another 1.4% higher. So, and the key thing is, if the dollar breaks to a new high, it will activate this target 4% higher, taking the dollar index back above the 100 level, which we haven't seen for a very, very long time. It'd be interesting to see whether the dollar will do that. And looking against the euro, we're seeing euro dollar lower on that stronger dollar. This whole Brexit turmoil not just bad for sterling, but not necessarily good for the euro either. And we've got downsides activated here as well. The Japanese yen. Seeing the dollar stronger here, as I often say, it always tends to show up here first. Bullish in all three time frames. Sterling actually is flat this morning, but has really collapsed the last 2 days. It'll be interesting to see how it behaves this morning. But we are seeing downside targets activated now, to parity. So against the dollar, $1 to one sterling. It's hard to imagine, but that's what we're seeing. Against the euro, we're seeing sterling lower as well today. Yesterday, Monday it fell away heavily, and yesterday it just sat where it fell to. If we make new lows this morning, that gives us a new downside target of 106. That's 4% lower. And against the Swiss franc, we're seeing sterling lower as well. Um, Against the Aussie dollar, they're seeing a push lower as well. And then looking at Bitcoin, we're up 0.5% on Bitcoin this morning, but interestingly, still bearish in all three time frames. The US market ended up flat yesterday on the S&P 500, a little change, just slightly down. Didn't hold on to any gains there, and the Nasdaq 100 actually did close up slightly. The Dow was down 0.2%, and we're still bearish, medium and short term, so we're not out of the woods at all. And the Russell 2000 is still plugging new lows here, so that's looking not so good. And we're just starting to enter into bearish territory on the weekly chart, so we're starting to see a long-term downtrend building. The futures are up this morning. The S&P future up 0.2%. The Nasdaq E-mini up just under 1/3%. So we should see markets recovering. The FTSE 100 is also looking pretty bearish on that medium-term chart. We are up slightly this morning, but that whole scenario of Brexit is really weighing on the UK market, and we're bearish on the weekly, the daily, and the 60-minute. No clear downside targets. That's the only real thing for the FTSE at the moment. It's not hard to say where it would go to. There's not enough selling thrusts to produce a downside target. The 250, on the other hand, we do have a target of 21% in the long-term chart, 3% lower on the short-term chart, and of course we are making new 18-month lows, so quite significant there. The DAX is up 0.5% this morning, strong showing in Asia and expectations of a rise in the US. The CAC Courant is up 0.5%, so looking stronger there. Japan was up quite sharply overnight, so we're seeing a bit of a recovery, but we are again bearish on all three time frames, so it's hard to be bullish even with last night's move. The charts are still bearish. The Hang Seng similarly bearish on all three charts, and China, the one we've been most worried about, is up 1/3%, lagging really the performance of the Hong Kong and Japan. So we are seeing the Chinese market still looking worrying. Downside targets here really hanging over the market. The Sensex in India up 1%. Political turmoil there with Modi being voted out, and we're also seeing the Aussie market was up pretty sharply, 1.4%. Looking at commodities, Brent crude is up 0.6%, still bearish on that medium and short-term chart. We do have an upside target, 62.75. So that's 3% higher. And on WTI, we are also seeing a push higher. So that's quite key. US nat gas fell quite sharply yesterday, back to $4.33. The triangle pattern that we've talked about is still holding on here in the medium-term daily chart. So this is just a setback. We do have targets 428, 422, and 407, and so those downside targets in train. And we do actually have a medium-term downside target of 375. One here, not activated, 379. Will we go back below $4? Keep an eye on those shorter term charts. Gold sitting steady at 1244, holding on to its bullish trend, and short and medium term still has work to do long term, but we still do have these big targets in train 1302, 1257. We do have a little counter trend target, but gold holding on. Silver also bullish on the short term chart in sympathy with gold. US 10-year yields just ticking up, just picking up a little bit there, and the bond in Germany's bond market actually holding on to some gains there too. Looking at the individual stocks, we look to Asia Pacific. We can see a seed of green here, so pretty much up everywhere. And this is all coming from Yahoo Finance. We see here there's quite a few stocks up, 7-6% in the Aussie market. So Galaxy Resources has been rising, but still bearish on the charts. This is really much a theme. Even when we see these big performances, we still see after terrible shocks to the price. So really hard to get excited about those moves. On the downside, because we had an up market, there weren't as many downside stocks. We had St Barbara Limited starting to look like a recovery here, so that's looking better. China, we had a mixed picture, but mostly up, and Hong Kong again. It's just ranking by performance. We see here we had China Resources up 6.5%. The Nifty 50 performing remarkably well given the turmoil we've seen in the politics in India. India bulls housing, one we're seeing always in those leaders, having big moves here after a lot of volatility after big falls. And if you look at the Nikkei, we see here's Yamaha is up 8%. So we are seeing some quite big performances here, but again, bearish trends. Taking a look at Europe, we start by looking at the FTSE 100. So markets open this morning, Rolls-Royce up strongly. This lower sterling starting to benefit a lot of companies in the FTSE 100. Remember, 75% of FTSE 100 companies' earnings come from abroad. The domestic stocks, such as Sainsbury's, not so much. So lower sterling doesn't really help them there. Just looking at retailers, they're being pretty heavily hit generally, especially local retailers. Taking a look at the 250, we've got Vivo Energy up 4%, but if we look on the downside, Superdry down a massive 21%, and they've been falling pretty much for the last year, gone from $20 now below 500. So, sorry, 200 pence, so £20 to down below £5. So really big falls there. Profit warning. Also, Dixon's Carphone Warehouse down 11% on a profits. Bigger loss there as well. So we're seeing quite a big move there. Looking to Europe, we've got Brazil, we've got Brussels, we've got stocks up 5% there. Rolls-Royce in the leaders. Looking on the other end of the scale, Pandora down 7%, jewelry retailer in Denmark. And so we are seeing a lot of poor performances, a lot of them UK stocks. That's it for today. Keep an eye on these charts. It'll be very interesting seeing, with all the political turmoil in the UAE, how sterling performs. Just staying bearish for the moment. But the market has anticipated a lot of this, of course. That's it for now. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.